I'm going to watch the testimony and make commentary on it. And so this is more like a reaction video than it is an analysis. So I hope that's okay. I set up as best I could for sound. I've got these things on, so it means I can't hear if there's background noise. And you might see Watson later. Let me know what you think of this format. Let's go.
Something was going on there, nod, nod, wink, wink. And it's not like me to do this, but at some point, if I may be less than polite, I said, wait a minute, cut the crap.
Yeah.
I said, what's going on here? I said, if you two have stuff you want to talk about with each other or whatever, go ahead. But it was clear that there was communication going on there, and I could not rely on what the defendant was saying, looking at me, and I left the room. I said, I'm going to get up and leave now, and you two talk about it. Go ahead, and I'll be back, and maybe we'll go on, maybe not. And I waited for a while, came back in, and they said, yeah, they would stop this. And then I changed the positions so that I could see both what the defendant was doing and what his or her attorney was doing, so that there was no, as far as I could prevent it, there was no communication between the two of them. And so
did I understand this right? She has the attorney in with the client? Okay.
I did, if memory serves, this was recent enough so that I knew enough to place you. Is that correct? Is that where I did place you?
Well, and we have a stipulation for all the 14 hours of video has been admitted. And so if the jury wants to view the videos, they are going to be more than welcome to when they go back to deliberations, and they can confirm both seating positions and that there wasn't any crap going on.
7:29 is an interview that took place on November 15th, 2022 in the morning. 7:30 is an interview that took place on November 15th, 2022 in the afternoon. 7:31 is an interview that took place on November 16, 2022 in the morning. Exhibit 732 is an interview that took place on November 16th, 2022 in the afternoon. 7:33 is a interview that took place November 17th, 2022 in the morning. And finally, 7:34 is an interview that took place on November 17, 2022 in the afternoon.
Probably not be aware that the other has committed a heinous kind of act. And then there will be others where they do know what happened. And
well, and part of the DID phenomena is in some degree protective measures to keep some memories kind of hidden from some of the other alters. Could you talk a little bit about that?
to think about it,
Well, for example,
in certain instances, well, I've seen several serial murder cases in which when a different entity is operating, is in control or seems to be in control, that entity may be the sweetest, nicest guy you ever met. And you will, if you read a little bit about it, about different cases, that sometimes.
Hold on, several serial killers? And there's a different entity? Okay, so I'm not disputing Dr. Lewis's qualifications. And I don't know which cases she's talking about. So maybe there were several, but psychopaths um, who are serial killers, they seem like different entities at the time they're committing their crimes as compared to when they're living their double life. So I don't know. I guess I don't know. I don't know which cases she's talking about. I'd be really interested in knowing though.
Serial killers are not recognized because when they are not in that homicidal, murderous, enraged entity, they are perfectly sweet and in fact they can talk about ethical issues and be critical and I think that it's probably one of the reasons that that it's very hard to catch serial killers because much of the time they're not in that state and you'd never guess.
Well, because in that situation like that, if somebody does suffer from DID, they may present in a manner that they seem completely innocent because the memory of the horrible act is stored somewhere else. Would that be
Yes,
accurate?
it as far as they know, then they did not do it.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, and then they don't look at.
I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble. Um, if you're a serial killer and operating without being caught, how do you control then when your other entity's going to come out? And how do you control it when you're stalking your victim? I mean, which entity's doing that? Um, I don't know. Okay, maybe I haven't seen the cases she's seen.
As if they did it, and you know, this is probably one of the reasons why it is very, very hard for clinicians, not just for lay people who have not trained in this, but for clinicians to believe that this is possible because it is so unbelievable in many ways. It, but it does occur.
And it
Could
could,
you repeat it?
how could having a traumatic brain injury comorbid with DID
Okay.
impact somebody being violent?
Okay. Um, it's been well established over the years. This isn't new psychiatry or neurology that different kinds of severe damage to the brain can be followed by impulsivity and a loss of control and often violent behaviors and any number of injuries to the brain can cause violence.
That's true. I've seen that in court.
Separate from that, a, a child who has been abused and tortured and enraged and made to feel helpless and then made to dissociate can become violent, can misperceive what is happening, can uh, can blame an altered state and attack that altered state, or can misperceive another person as as an enemy of some sort, so that they do seem to be somewhat different because one seems to have a psychodynamic quality to it, and but there's something about injuries to the brain that have been reported again and again in terms of subsequent lack of control of you know not just of violence but of other impulses.
Going both to the 14 hours of interviews that you did with Miss Stauch and the collateral data that you had been provided, what were you made aware of about her upbringing, about growing up?
I did not interview any of her relatives myself. I don't believe I did anyway.
But do you remember getting some reports from
Yes.
the social worker,
I
Kyle?
did.
Okay.
But I'm going by what I have gotten from other people's interviews.
Okay.
And uh,
Hold on. So no relatives were interviewed, and she's going by other people's interviews, which in some respects is fine because she's going to get another clinician's assessment. She's going to get what they saw and heard and their own subjective assessment through their lens. And these are trained people, but not interviewing other family members means that anything that is said by the defendant is a self-report, which means they can say anything. And so if you don't interview anyone else, you're not getting any corroboration unless you get it in some other way. When we do threat assessments, one of the things that we always did was get that corroborating or corollary information, because even in cases where somebody's not lying, that's a valuable resource and can give you all kinds of other information and other perceptions and other people's observations that the person being interviewed, even if they're being truthful, doesn't know to tell you or doesn't think of. So in a case where this is a criminal defense to try and escape accountability, I would be really leery of relying on self-reports and leery of relying on other people's interviews where they've relied on self-reports. So I'm hoping that as we go along that there's actually more to this, that wasn't all there was.
several people seem to agree that, first of all, that she came from an extraordinarily violent household, including that, well, that of her mother, Deborah,
Yeah.
and her mother's tendency to latch on to males in her environment who were extremely abusive, and abusive to her, but also apparently abusive to Letecia as well. There was one man in the mother's life who apparently pushed Letecia into a shower and beat her naked in the shower. It was these kinds of grotesquely uh, physically, and I would call that sexually as well as physically abusive. Also, there were several of her relatives who spoke about oh, aunts, uncles, great aunts and uncles, known as grandparents or whatever, who who gave her enemas repeatedly. By the way, this is a question that not a whole lot of psychiatrists ask, but it's very important because it's one of the commoner ways that sodomy occurs in the torture of abused kids.
Well,
So
in fact, she detailed
I'm a little bit confused. She said that she didn't interview any family members. But now she's saying several relatives spoke of something. So maybe somebody else interviewed relatives and put it in reports. We'll have to see if the question is asked.
was actually an what did she let me rephrase this. Would the manner in which she described and other people described her upbringing be consistent with the environment that could foster DID,
That could foster,
dissociative identity disorder?
as far as I know, again,
Yep.
because I didn't get this firsthand. I have to go by what other people told me, and it sounded as though the household was a madhouse. That there was man after man. Not only did the mother get hooked up with very violent men, but my recollection is Letecia herself got hooked up with violent people, and that it was very.
So I'm not going to dispute that Letitia got hooked up with violent people or she didn't. It wouldn't be a surprise if she did, but I'm also recalling how she tried to make Al sound like an abuser when she was talking to the police in order to get herself out of trouble. That being true, that doesn't mean that nothing ever happened to her, because intimate partner abuse and child abuse are so common. It's yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise if that was true, but without independent corroboration, because she is who she is and she lies so much, it's really hard to know.
Very hard for me. Could not refer to him as father or even as James. She referred to him always as Jackass James. And it was as if that kind of made it possible for her to even refer to him, but with great disgust. I believe that he was one of the people who was involved with sexually molesting her during several years of her childhood. And so that he was one of the people who sexually molested her, to the best of my knowledge.
Do you recall that he molested her up until the time that she actually took off from home?
According to my notes, she left the home at about age 15. But also, I have in my notes that that she would run away into the woods and hide from this person. That she was terrified of him.
A very high proportion of runaways are running from abuse.
And then at 15, that she actually left him.
Did she describe to you events or coping mechanisms that she would employ that would be consistent with dissociative identity disorder?
Coping mechanisms. I'm trying to understand better what.
Well, I
kinds
mean,
of
did
things
she
are-
describe to you things that would be consistent, just in general, consistent with dissociative disorder?
I hadn't thought of it so much as describing as kind of witnessing things. For example, when I was interviewing her over a period of time, suddenly it seemed to me that she was speaking Russian. I don't speak Russian, and it only had that lilt to it. I didn't have words that sounded Russian, but it looked as though she had switched into a different entity. I think she believed she was speaking some other language, but I don't know what that was. And but I can't define in my head exactly the moment at which she did it, so that I can't tell you what the coping mechanism was. But that would be a coping mechanism to suddenly switch into something that made you more comfortable and got you out of whatever situation you felt you were in at the time.
So when you're in a stressful or uncomfortable situation, that's when the switches happen, according to Dr. Lewis. Very interesting. I think you probably know what I'm thinking right now.
Did she describe any alters to you or other personas?
She did. The one that I remember particularly is she referred to somebody named Maria, and Maria apparently was a physically abusive uh, entity. And when my recollection was that that I actually heard her speak, and that she was harsh and angry and hurtful. Yes, so she did refer to, and in fact, it made me wonder whether when I first saw that, I thought, have I just met the aspect of her personality that uh, that killed Gannon? And, and it's a speculation. I don't know, but at
No. All right, two things here that popped out at me. One is that Maria is physically abusive. Physically abusive to whom? Because sometimes an alternate personality can be physically abusive to the person themselves. And sometimes they're physically abusive to other people. But the other thing that just jumped out at me was she said she's wondering if she met the person or the personality who killed Gannon. And she says it's speculation. She doesn't know. So as I'm watching, I'm thinking, is she saying she didn't know at that point in the interview? Or she doesn't know now? Because isn't this what she's supposed to figure out? So this is very interesting. Let's keep going.
the time, she is the one that is most closely allied with violence, as I recall.
Would it be unusual for alters to kind of be distinguishing on who they allowed themselves to be presented to? Like, for example, I mean, would an alter maybe less willing to come out to different evaluators?
I think that's probably a general statement you could say. But I can't say anything terribly
Okay.
useful. Though.
What did she describe to you about, oh, let me back this up. Did she also describe, and you also see evidence in her medical records of possible traumatic brain injuries?
Yes,
There was a car crash. Do you recall that?
yes.
There was also a time where a bookshelf fell out.
I'm gonna check this deleting.
No, I'm gonna allow it because it seems like it's foundational at this point and it's leading up to something.
And
It's there.
medical reports where a bookshelf had fallen on her head and she lost consciousness for 15 minutes.
My recollection of that was I don't recall the medical part of it so much as I believe that she was in her teacher mode. She is quite an amazing young woman in this way, in that she's not stupid, and there are times when she seems to be able to function as a teacher or whatever. And I believe that she was in a classroom, kids had left, and I think that uh, a bookshelf fell down on the back of her head. She fell down, and I believe she lost consciousness. And so it was a fairly severe injury to her head.
Okay. So a bookcase fell on her head. How do we know this? Is this something she said? And she said the injury was fairly severe. So are we going to see medical records then? Because a severe head injury, I mean, she's a doctor and she's saying it's severe. A severe head injury would require rehabilitation. It would require quite a bit of time off work. Um, I mean, everybody around her would know, right? And the other thing is with the TBI, sorry, traumatic brain injury, yes, yes, there are behavior changes, or there can be. And sometimes they can be really weird or really extreme, but they don't pop up much later. I, when I say much later, I'm not talking about days or sometimes even a little bit longer. They don't pop up like a year later or something. Um, Even a month later, you know pretty quickly that there's been a behavior change and other people will notice. So if this occurred, I want to know when this occurred. I'm not sure she said and I didn't catch it. If this occurred um, long before the crime, then the behavior change would have been seen before the crime. You see what I'm getting at? So I'm interested in how they know that this happened, if it's another self-report, and how serious it truly was, and what the a neuropsych or whatever said about that injury.
Could you talk about her description of the kind of the events leading up to Gannon's death?
Which one?
Yeah. Or the events that she related to you?
You know, it's hard for me to distinguish which I read and which she related to me because they did kind of go together. Um, she she gave some of the most peculiar descriptions of what might have happened to Gannon. That, for example, at one point he's missing. She doesn't know where he is. And then at another point, a man named Eduardo comes in, rapes her, and I believe absconds with Gannon. And at another time, she talks about, I think that he was a pedophile, somebody whom she had Googled,
Yeah.
had somehow found on the internet. And I think that that he was one of the people who had absconded with or who had harmed Gannon. Um, there were numerous, you'd say almost mindless descriptions of what might have happened to this child. And what puzzled me was there, when you talk with her, and as if you've seen any of the pictures of her tapes, this is not a stupid girl. She is intelligent. She is in certain phases, certain states. She is able to reason, apparently logically, and to speak clearly and coherently. And yet she makes up the darndest stories that
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Because she's lying and manipulating. Oh my God. Sorry.
that no ordinary person of below average intelligence would expect to be believed. So that, excuse me, there is a puzzle. Do you know, I had after I thought about all of it together, I thought, I don't think she knows what happened. I don't think she knows. And I think that, as asked at different times, this is what came into her head and this is what she produced. But I don't think she knows for sure what happened.
Could that be confabulation?
Confabulation is, well, confabulation is when you have no memory for what happened. It's commonest in alcoholism and things like that, where the brain has been damaged in such a way that memory is impaired. And then many alcoholics will just ramble on and on about something and will give a story, and they will fill in parts that they can't remember, and they maybe don't even know that they're filling it in. And so her saying this could be a form of confabulation.
Could be a form of confabulation. Okay.
I don't know whether at the time that she says these things, she believes them, because to you or to me, they make no sense. They're silly.
Did she, back to the events and questions and how she was describing it to you, what did she describe symptoms that could or
Look at Letecia in the background. She's like doing these weird body movements and staring at the doctor like she looks like something out of a scary movie.
experiences or perceptions that could be similar to psychosis?
Oh, I would say similar to that, by definition, would be categorized as psychotic.
Could you talk a little about those?
Sure. Well, one of the commonest psychotic symptoms that we're all familiar with from books, TV, would be, let's say, hearing voices, or let's say talking to people that are not there. And well, at least in to my understanding, psych.
Hearing voices is one of the things that drives some people with DID to a psychiatrist or psychologist in the first place, because they're hearing voices and it scares them. So they're hearing their alters talking and it scares the crap out of them. They're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm crazy, what's going on? And that's what drives them to treatment.
Psychosis is a belief that someone has that most normal people do not have. It can be a perception. It can be hearing something that none of us hear. It can be believing something. It can be a kind of paranoid belief or what have you that doesn't make sense. It can be an auditory sound that you don't hear. And she not only could tell about talking to different beings that were not there, but she puzzled things up a bit because she also, I believe, talked to God. And there are a lot of us here, probably in this room, who at times have thought that, gee, we talked to God, or we thought we had an answer, or we wished we did, or we didn't. So that you can't simply say that her having talked to God was a psychotic symptom. It may well have been. What I found more convincing in terms of her psychotic symptoms were things that she didn't tell me about, but I read through I guess they were kind of nursing or guards notes from the correctional institution where she was.
The jail?
From jail. And there were several times that different caretakers of one sort or another looked in the room and found her talking to someone who was not there.
All right. First of all, this is post-defense behavior, after the crime behavior. She's in jail, so I want to know when. I want to know the dates. When you look back at her, all of her interviews, starting from her very first interview with the local police, all the way up to the FBI, and then you look at her psych interviews, they're different. And the closest she comes to actually telling the truth, the most normal she acts, is the one with the original detectives. That's the closest she came. That's the most coherent she was. And in order for them to prove not guilty by reason of insanity, they have to prove that she was psychotic at the time of the offense. The other thing here is she's in jail for this. She's decided that this is going to be her defense, this psychosis, and she knows she's being watched all the time, and she better put on a good act. So I'd like to know when these observations were made and compare those dates to when the idea was first introduced to her that maybe she's insane and maybe that's a way out.
And this was not as though, as far as I knew, she didn't know anyone was watching her, or she wasn't performing for the galleries, that she was talking with somebody, and there was nobody else there. And there were several episodes like this, and those are psychotic symptoms. In dissociation,
They are psychotic symptoms. She's right. If the person isn't acting. Maybe I'm too skeptical. I don't know. Let's see.
you get this when it's very common for an individual to hear alternates talking with each other, or talking to him, or talking to her. So that I think that the kind of auditory hallucination that you often associate with, say, schizophrenia, it has a more physiological, a more biochemical quality, and also it's often treated with medication that tells you that something is going on that is responsive to chemical intervention. This is different from hearing dissociated entities talking with each other. And that
I just thought of a question as she's talking about medical, like intervention with medicine. I'm wondering if at the time of any of these reports, if she was assessed because of that behavior that's being reported, and if so, was medication tried in order to alleviate these voices?
as far as I know, that doesn't respond to medication.
Did she, well, how did she describe, do you recall, how kind of Gannon starting the fire and how that kind of impacted her state?
I was a bit confused by it, so I'm not positive. I can only share with you what I remember. I think there was a candle on the floor. Sure.
She's a bit confused by it because Letecia told a story that didn't make any sense, and the doctor is being kind. She's also working for the defense. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I've worked for both the Crown and the defense and always said, look, I find what I find in terms of when I was doing threat assessment. And so it didn't matter to me whose side it was. There are, I would say most experts are not biased, or at least try really hard not to be biased. So anyway, this is interesting. The way she chooses to describe things is interesting. She's in a position. She can't say, I didn't believe her. But on the other hand, she seems to be believing a lot. Let's see what happens.
And I think that some of the carpet burned. And this is separate. There was a different fire at another time that apparently really traumatized her, but we're talking about Gannon at this time. And I believe that she also said that Eduardo was the carpet fixer, perhaps even he helped put out the fire, I don't recall, and that then there was an attempt to cover up the fire that had occurred. But I think that she thought that he had started it with a candle.
Do you recall her describing after the candle fire incident? It was at that time she started having visions of her stepdad, James, being alive.
So when you go through thinking about something, I'm not telling anybody anything they didn't know. I'm just ranting. You have to make sure your premise is solid. And so it sounds like he's going forward based on a faulty premise, based on the premise that because Letecia said Gannon started the fire with the candle, that indeed Gannon started the fire with the candle, and somehow because of that, Letecia was traumatized, and he's going somewhere with this. But if that's incorrect, and the evidence suggests it is, because it's hard to start a fire with a candle in the manner that was described. So if that premise is incorrect, then anything else you base that on is incorrect as well, or going to be flawed as well.
Alive and her seeing him.
Being
Alive and her seeing her stepdad, James.
I don't recall that it was that time particularly. There were times that she saw him. I think there was a time she was driving a car and she was on the highway and she saw some very large figure, but I can't recall that that was specifically the time she.
Well, and that
Seeing a previous abuser while you're out in the community or in your neighborhood is not actually uncommon among victims. And it doesn't mean you're psychotic, it doesn't mean you're mentally ill. That's trauma related. So a victim of violent crime will very often see somebody who reminds them of the abuser and have like a fear response. So this isn't unusual. This is not delusional. It's pretty common.
that would have been the next Monday that her and Gannon were driving, and you recall her describing that she actually saw James on the side of the road at that point in time.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Sustain, rephrase.
Do you recall anything about her, any visualizations or something that could be a visual hallucination
Yes.
that she recalled that occurred in the day or so after the fire?
Yes, I recall that I thought it was out the car window that they were driving, and I thought it was a large figure of some sort. There's also, she had a visual hallucination of some entity with a cape. These are hallucinations, and because she sees them, the rest of us do not see them. That has to be considered a psychotic symptom because it is beyond reality, or the reality.
Could it be maybe another crazy pile of malarkey to justify something? I don't know. When you were a kid, you ever wake up at night in your room and look at, I don't know, maybe a pile of clothes on your chair and think it's a monster? right? People do that stuff. It doesn't mean they're psychotic. It doesn't mean they're having hallucinations. It's possible that at some point in the house, even around the time that all this took place, it's possible that she saw a shadow, or she saw something and then had that thought. That doesn't mean it's a hallucination. And according to Letecia's own story, the person she shot standing on the bed was not a hallucination. That was a real person. She may have assigned a different meaning to what she was seeing, but he was a real person.
That we know.
The excuse when she called herself into work, that early Monday morning, that it was the excuse she said was, my stepdad has been killed in a car crash.
This I categorize in my own
Yeah.
brain as one of her least believable concoctions of what happened or what must have happened. To the best of my knowledge, this stepdad had died perhaps 8 years prior
Yes.
to that, and yet she was going to his funeral that day.
Hold on. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that she actually believed. So let's say she's in a psychotic state. She actually believes she's going to her stepfather's funeral, that he's died, and she has to go. Then she's sort of back in time, right? So she has no job at this school to call into because she's somewhere else entirely. So she wouldn't have texted. I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe I have that wrong, but this doesn't, I'm sorry, this doesn't hang together for me.
Surely this is, first of all, it would be stupid if she were a stupid girl. She is not stupid. To give that as an explanation as why she can't do this or why she can go there. There is something about the way her mind is working then that is distorted and is not in touch with reality.
To call in work and arrange, to call in work with a story that you need to travel, so you need time off that's going to be more than a day, and you want to set it up so that you don't have to call in the next day and the next day, then a death in the family is a good excuse, right? It's a good excuse. And if you say, well, I have to travel, so then they won't expect her to be in. This, making this excuse is stupid only under two circumstances. And one is that if they, I'm stumbling, sorry. One is if she expects they're going to call and check, then yeah, it's stupid. But they're probably not going to call and check. And it's not stupid if your plan is to never go back to work. Remember, they were pushing her for paperwork. She was saying she wanted to quit, and I think it's because she didn't want to hand in that paperwork because she didn't have what they needed. So I think she lied on somewhere with her employment and couldn't produce what they needed her to produce, and she was going to lose her job, and Al would have been furious, and she had to do something about that.
I can't tell you whether this is part of a dissociative episode or another psychiatrist might want to call it a separate psychotic episode. I think you had some psychiatrists who diagnosed a borderline personality, and many psychiatrists who think about borderline states think about episodic psychoses. And certainly I couldn't argue with interpreting that as an episodic psychosis.
What did, do you,
Couldn't argue with that as an episodic psychosis is not the same as saying that's what it was. She is saying, you know, she's not in touch with reality. And certainly her stories are bonkers. But she only needs to tell this a story enough to get to her next step or to get away or to delay being caught. Let's keep going.